Story 1. Every time I see this one Vine where it is the GameCube startup sound but it ends with a guy tripping and yelling shit, I burst out laughing. Cannot explain why. Story 2. Two of my friends and I were working on a movie, but we messed up some files and accidentally replaced the black screen after a character's suicide with a panorama of cinnamon rolls. Story 3. I was in a large multi-floor bookstore, walking down a flight of stairs, when I heard a phone ring. A sales clerk answered it. Self-help, may I help you? That struck me as the funniest thing in the world, and I burst into sustained laughter. People began to stare. Embarrassed, I hurried to another section, still laughing and drawing more attention, and ended up running a half circuit of the floor before taking refuge under the stairs to compose myself. Story 4. I was in a scholastic assessment test class and we were going over practice questions. The instructor read aloud the phrase, "a group of spoon collectors," and I began laughing so hard and for so long that I had to leave the classroom. I'm over it now, but it was troubling. Story 5. Sometime in the mid to late 2000s, my husband was on the phone with iRobot customer support about our Roomba. I was in another room but could hear his side of the conversation and tell he was not getting the results he had hoped for. As he grew more frustrated, he blurted, "I've had problems with this robot since the day I brought it home." Something about that phrase hit me hard. I started laughing and couldn't stop. I was still laughing when he got off the phone. He understandably wanted to know what was wrong. Through maniacal laughter, I parroted the phrase back to him, which created a feedback loop. It has been over a decade, but thinking of that phrase still makes me giggle. Story 6. A few weeks ago, I was taking a shower and looked at my foot. It looked so ridiculous that I started laughing and couldn't stop. It seemed like I had weird, paw-like failed hands attached to my legs, and I imagined my body ending that way. I laughed at my foot for about 5 minutes. Story 7. I was working in a group home, finishing paperwork after an overnight shift, and accidentally wrote shampoo instead of shampoo. One of the residents asked if I needed help. I laughed so hard. Story 8. I misheard an episode of the Octonauts about the coconut crab. The phrase astronaut crabs conjured images of crabs in spacesuits and of giant crabs cracking open astronauts with their claws. I laughed so hard I could hardly breathe. There were tears of mirth. My children were terrified, but they tried to keep up with the joke, which I could barely explain. We still talk about it, but it will never be quite as funny as when my brain caught me by surprise. Story 9. I almost died, I think, playing a video game. One of my wife's favorite games is Shenmue. Originally released on the Dreamcast in 1999, it plays like an early prototype for games such as Yakuza or Sleeping Dogs, but it is very crude by modern standards. It is quite bad, in fact, but in a so bad it's good sort of way, which is rare for video games. They released a remaster a couple of years ago, and she had me play through it while she watched. She wanted to see what I thought. The plot revolves around the main character investigating his father's murder. He does this mostly by wandering around town and asking random people on the street questions, hoping it will help. At one point, he gets a lead that something might be going on at the docks. The main character, who is not very bright, thinks, "Sailors work at the docks. I should talk to some sailors. Do you go to the docks? No, that would make too much sense." Instead, as you wander aimlessly, you can ask people, "Do you know where I could find some sailors?" Over and over again. It became funny, repeatedly asking random people where to find sailors. At one point my wife went to the bathroom and I stopped to look at the in-game journal. Keeps all your notes, but they are written in fake handwriting as if the main character had written them. I flipped it open and the only thing on the current page in big letters was, "Must find sailors." I completely lost it. We had already been laughing about this search for sailors for an hour, and when that popped up it was the last straw. I was hysterical with laughter. I could not stop. I could not breathe. It started to hurt, which only made me laugh harder, and I began to worry I would pass out. My wife walked back in and was very confused. She was just in time to see my cat, who had been curled up on the couch next to me, start to yowl and sweat at me. Apparently my lunatic laughter had unnerved him. "What's so funny?" she asked. I gestured weakly toward the screen with the still open journal and managed to wheeze, "Must find sailors." as I fell into another fit of laughter. It was 5 to 10 minutes before I was coherent. Must find sailors is still a nice little private joke between us. Story 10. I did not question my sanity, but I got stuck in a laughing loop with my then 1-year-old son. He was laughing at my laughter, and I was laughing at his. It lasted for most of an hour, and we were both exhausted afterward. It was more than 30 years ago, and it still makes me smile when I think about it. Story 11. In high school, a guy at my table was asked if he had ever had sex, and with the straightest face said, "No, but I've seen dogs do it." His frankness and deadpan attitude made me laugh so hard, and for so long I was worried I was going to pass out. Story 12. There is a sticker in my phone keyboard gallery of a purple llama holding a box of carrots that says busy. I saw it at work, laughed so hard I cried, and could not stop thinking about the image, so I had to leave work. Edit. It is actually a person dressed in a purple llama suit, a drama llama. Story 13. I do not remember the context, but my best friend and I, then in our preteens or early teens, were flopping around on her bedroom floor and screaming fish out of water. We insisted on showing her mom, who looked at us like we were on meth. I almost passed out. I could not breathe from laughing so hard. Story 14. I was in the grocery store about 2 weeks ago when I went to grab some eggs. As I opened the carton to check them, I remembered a Reddit post about a man who spent much of his life not knowing why people open egg cartons. He was worried that if he did not open them, people would stare at him, so he opened them just to look the part. I started laughing out loud while looking at the eggs. People stared at me and I left immediately. Story 15. My mom once said boo to my dad, who kept hiccuping to make him stop. She said it so innocently that we could not stop laughing. The laughter lasted about an hour. Story 16. My friends and I went on a trip with a youth leadership organization. The trip was supposed to last 5 days, but our flight home was delayed by 22 hours. We stayed in a hotel and played cards against humanity. One of the prompts asked for the worst line on a first date, and someone answered yeast. We laughed for 10 minutes, and my sides hurt for the rest of the night. Story 17. It was a windy day, and I was eating a bagged lunch with my coworkers. Suddenly a huge gust of wind blew the bag and all my food away, leaving me staring at an empty table with a fork in my hand. I didn't even try to catch it. I just started laughing so hard that I had to lie down. Story 18. In the bloopers for This Is the End, when they are talking about religion, Craig Robinson says that Danny is Muslim, and Danny McBride just says shalom. It is not even that funny, but I lose my mind every time. Story 19. I read a meme asking if Norwegian clowns say junk. My girlfriend speaks fluent Norwegian and told me it would be pronounced kind of like hjonk. I thought I was going to pass out from laughing so hard. Every now and then a quiet hjonk would make me laugh even harder. Story 20. My family was eating at Red Robin when my grandpa told a great joke. I laughed so hard that I soiled my pants. I was about 5. My dad took me to the restroom and asked if they were my lucky underwear. I said no. He cut them off with his pocket knife, cleaned me up, and we went back to finish our meal. Story 21. I am in Toys R Us with my 3-year-old who suddenly says she has to go to the bathroom. I ask, number 1 or number 2? She says number 2. I grab her hand and rush to find an employee and ask, do you have a bathroom? The employee says it is on the other end of the store. I tell my daughter, we have to run. She says, no, do not worry. I blew it out. I could barely carry my messy daughter through the store because I was laughing uncontrollably. I had to leave her pants and underwear in the bathroom trash and carry her out with my coat wrapped around her waist. I must have looked absolutely insane. Story 22. This actually happened to a friend and me. We were high and typing random phrases into Google Translate. He suggested I type dingleberries and translate it into Spanish. It translated to Bayas del Dingle. For some reason we lost our shit at that. I don't think we stopped laughing for half an hour. My head was throbbing from laughing so hard, and my lungs hurt. Story 23. My friend and I were about 12 when we watched Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. There is a scene where a giant bowl of water spills on everyone sitting in the bleachers. A man stands in the splash zone ready to get wet, but everyone except him gets splashed. He throws his hat on the ground and yells, "Ah, come on!" We laughed so hard that we replayed many scenes in slow motion, zoomed in, and so on. Story 24. It was actually in an AskReddit thread. The question was something like, what is an unsolved mystery or paranormal activity that cannot be explained? Someone replied that when they were younger they farted and the television turned off. I have no idea why, but because it was sandwiched between much more serious replies I lost it. I was laughing so much my wife came to ask what was so funny. Her reaction, basically calling me an idiot, made me laugh even more. Even as I typed this comment, I'm grinning thinking about it. Edit, whoa, this blew up. My wife is still sleeping beside me and I'm giggling reading all these replies. Thanks for the awards and the laughs. This is what makes Reddit awesome. Story 25. Many years ago, I went through a week-long phase when I could not read my credit card number over the phone without laughing hysterically. There was no reason. It started one day and I got in my head, so it snowballed. Every time I tried to order food or confirm a travel reservation, I would start laughing, and it would take me forever to finish the number. The surprising thing was how infectious the laughter was. I expected the people on the other end of the line to be annoyed, but 9 times out of 10 they started laughing too. Felt like a strange, contagious bit of hysteria. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. It has not happened since, though I still brace myself every time, just in case. Story 26. I had a dream recently that a friend of mine spent 2 hours focusing intensely on writing something down. When he was finally finished, he showed it to me. In a 5-year-old's handwriting, written in crayon, the page simply read apple cider donuts. I laughed so hard I woke myself up crying. Story 27. A double headstone at a cemetery that said Graves. Thanks for the awards, gentlemen. Glad I could bring a chuckle out of you. Story 28. Wet soup. Just the idea of going into a restaurant, asking how the soup is and being told wet. Story 29. My best friend from high school came over for a sleepover, and my mom had fallen asleep on the couch while we were hanging out. My little brother, who was around 10 at the time, thought it would be funny to grab my mom's hairdryer, stand over her sleeping body, point it at her and yell, "Where were you on the night of the murder?" She startled awake. That sent us into hysterics, but what made it even better was her reaction. She shook her head, slowly sat up, and said to my brother, "Okay, time for bed," in her most tired voice. My best friend and I spent the next 10 minutes rolling on the floor laughing. Story 30. In a movie my family and I were watching, a man slowly raised a gun to fire at a woman. They did not show her being hit. They only showed a close-up of her high heels staggering back and forth. I burst out laughing. Everyone in the room glared at me. Story 31. My wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and I were on the bus. A couple of stoners got on, and one of them randomly said, "Dude, what if somebody made medical marijuana that gave you superpowers?" My girlfriend nearly died laughing. She tried to stay somewhat quiet so as not to be rude, but she failed. The stoners continued to talk about this and what kind of powers they would want for the whole bus ride. Imitating taking a hit. "I have munchy vision." This only made her laughing fits worse. Her laughing fit eventually caused me to laugh uncontrollably. It was like a self-sustaining fusion reaction at that point. Story 32. I was really high doing a puzzle with my husband, and we were eating the worst frozen pizza we had ever had. It was supposed to be garlic cheese, but tasted like nothing but cardboard. We started pulling everything out of the fridge to put on it and make it better. Finally, my husband decided to cook a bunch of hot dogs and roll them into the pizza. The idea of hot dog pizza was so funny that we both started laughing and could not stop. I laughed so hard it became physically painful. I could not breathe, but I could not stop laughing, and I kept making a strange honking cough. By the time we stopped, I was pretty sure I had laughed myself sober. We marked the date on our calendar so we would never forget Hot Dog Pizza Day. A month later, Pizza Hut released a hot dog crust pizza, and I felt like they had been watching us. Hot Dog Pizza Day is October 13th. Story 33. That song, "Oh That Smell, Can't You Smell That Smell," came on the radio, and my husband quietly muttered to himself, "Did she fart or something?" He didn't mean it to be funny. He probably just thought the song was dumb. I died laughing, and I'm still cracking up thinking about it, even though it was about 8 years ago. Story 34. I read a comment with a typo on a post yesterday and lost it laughing. The typo was rainbow capitalism. Story 35. Last night, I randomly thought of a line from one of those Markov chain generators. It was from an automatically generated Hallmark movie. The scene heading red interior, small town snow globe refillery. The mother says that she fills snow globes with snow globe juice better than Jesus Claus. That is probably not the exact wording, as it has been a while since I saw it, but it was so random that I could not explain why I was laughing. Story 36. I still do not understand it. A young cousin of mine was reading a book about a farmer named Farmer Brown to her teddy bear. She paused to say something to the bear, and I asked what his name was. She looked at me with a deadpan expression and said Farmer Brown as though I were a complete idiot. I laughed so hard that I cried, vomited, and nearly had a convulsion. Story 37. I was reading a list, probably on BuzzFeed. I don't know. And it included alternate names for things, such as danger noodle for snakes. When I got to volcano equals mountain fountain, I laughed for 20 minutes, had to pee, cried, and could not breathe. I could not even think about it for weeks without cracking up again. My husband thought I had lost my mind. Story 38. My friend and I nearly died laughing at the Benedict Cumberbatch memes, such as Benadryl Cabbage Patch. It reached the point where it physically hurt to laugh. Update. I woke up to more than 8,000 upvotes and 3 awards. It is heartwarming to see that in such terrible times, simple things can unite us in laughter. I have enjoyed reading new variations and silently shaking with laughter next to my sleeping partner. Thank God for the coronavirus disease 2019 Christmas mask. That name is the gift that keeps on giving. Story 39. I was breastfeeding my newborn in the middle of the night and watching Dave Chappelle. The Rick James skit was on. I laughed so hard I cried. My husband woke up and took the baby because he was afraid I would drop him. He asked what was wrong and I snorted, "I'm Rick James, bitch." He was not amused. Story 40. You have to understand that my mother has always been very eccentric, a bit of a weirdo. One night she woke me up and asked me to help her paint the staircase because she hated the color. We were having so much fun, making jokes, laughing, and throwing paint at each other. It is one of my favorite memories of her and I love her very much. I'm pretty sure we were just high on paint fumes, but I eventually made a joke about golf being gay-friendly because it is mostly a bunch of old men in short shorts trying to gently put their balls into small holes. We almost died laughing. We laughed so hard and for so long that we woke up everyone in the house. I love my mom. Even though she is older and sick, she has never lost that spark, that joy for life and everything in it. The happiest moments in my life have been with her. Postscript. I am showing her the comments and the number of upvotes this got. And she is very excited and happy now. Thank you, everyone. Story 41. I was cackling like a witch at a memory that was not even that funny. I had accidentally called a cup of tea tay. What made me look insane was that I started bursting out laughing in the back seat of my mom's car, while my mom and my sister were talking about how many people had died because of the last pandemic. That must have been horrible to hear. Story 42. A video appeared in my YouTube recommendations. It showed a seal sitting on the shore that farted. I laughed for 20 minutes. Story 43. At work during my lunch break, I pulled out a glass bottle of sparkling water and opened it. Apparently, it had been shaken in my bag. The cap exploded out of my hand and bounced off the ceiling, drenching me and everyone at my table. I laughed the whole time we mopped up, and I still grin like an idiot whenever I think about it. Story 44. One night I cut a roast on our kitchen table. Some of the grease and juices from the roast overflowed from the cutting board, fell onto the table, and from there spilled onto the floor. I did not feel like cleaning it up, so I put it off until the morning. The next morning I had forgotten about the spill and went to the refrigerator, which is right next to the kitchen table. Not seeing anything on the upper shelves, I bent down to look at the lower levels. Part of that involved adjusting my foot to widen my stance. For context, I am 6'2" and weigh 450 pounds. I widened my stance just enough for my foot to land in the grease. The grease immediately made my feet feel too close together, so I let my foot slide the rest of the way. I was now in a full Chinese split. Having not stretched this far since adolescence, my body was not prepared. I tilted backward to get out of the painful position, but as I did I imagined myself falling. Killed me. I laughed harder at that than anything I can remember. I spent about 15 minutes on the floor in the fetal position, crying with laughter. My sister was concerned I needed to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital. I eventually calmed down, and even now thinking about it makes me chuckle. Story 45. Oh my God. I was at school with my best friend. We were walking toward the principal's office when we saw the principal's secretary leave and walk to the payphone on the nearby wall. She put a coin in the slot, and the payphone suddenly fell and broke. We both started laughing so hard that we fell, and I wet my pants. Story 46. I was in high school when one of my friends said something stupid and another replied, "What do you have in your head? Confetti?" The mental image of a head suddenly exploding into confetti still cracks me up to this day. Story 47. I was reminiscing about a yoga class when my boyfriend decided to join. During a quiet wind-down stretching session, he farted loudly, the bubbly, cheeks flapping kind, and it took all my strength not to laugh because shaming is frowned upon in class. The worst part was when the instructor stopped talking for a while. I imagine it was because she had to regain her composure and not express shame. Those 2 minutes were brutal as I silently shook trying to contain my inner peace. I could not even look at my boyfriend's face until we left the building. Story 48. The first time I was high, the edibles were too strong. I spent an hour trying to Google how many parts the last Hobbit movie had. Finally, I was able to type it in and press search, but I had just searched for Hobbit parts. The only thing I could think was they are just like human parts but shorter and hairier. When I finally recovered from laughing, I tried again, but when I looked at the results, I had searched for Hobbit oats. Then I gave up. Story 49. This happens to me quite a bit when I read Reddit. The last one was a comment about a preacher referring to God as the great comforter, and the author imagined a hideous blanket. I am cracking up again thinking about it. Story 50. 6 years ago at school, I was eating a jar of Planters mixed nuts and looking at the warning label. It was barely 7 o'clock in the morning and I did not drink coffee at the time. The warning label said mixed nuts and I could not stop laughing. I know it is there for people who are not too bright, but it was just so blatant and hilarious, laughing out loud. Edit. Wow, that is a lot of unexpected upvotes. One could say it was quite literally nuts. Edit 2. Thank you for the awards. Story 51. In high school, my friends made a PowerPoint presentation for the class. As they presented, I noticed that the first few slides had a bunch of typos, no big deal. By the middle of the presentation, the errors became increasingly ridiculous. I quietly laughed at some of the funnier ones, but eventually I lost control and could not stop laughing. Every time I tried to stop, another typo appeared and made me laugh harder. I questioned my sanity that day. Story 52. My boyfriend and I were watching an episode of What We Do in the Shadows where Colin Robinson keeps baiting people with the updog joke. God love him, my boyfriend is not the brightest, and after the 4th or 5th time Colin said updog, he looked at me with a confused, annoyed expression and genuinely asked, "What is updog?" Mid-sentence he realized the joke and his face went from confused and annoyed to embarrassed. I laughed so hard I do not remember the rest of the episode. I make sure to bring up updog every couple of weeks so he does not live it down. Story 53. My bathroom fan recently started squeaking. When my 5-year-old heard it, she said, "Ugh, Dad, put the fan in crazy sound mode." I still laugh every time I hear it. Story 54. Yes, I was reading a book to my son called Pop Pop Pop, and I laughed like a lunatic the whole time. Actually, it was not that funny, but at the time I could not stop laughing. I wondered if my brain had finally cracked. Story 55. I told my girlfriend that if she did not laugh within the next 30 seconds, I would cook dinner. For the next 15 minutes, we laughed uncontrollably, with genuine tears and hyperventilation. Story 56. My sister, who is 6 years younger than me, said, "You can't catch me," and promptly ran into the base of a slide. Everyone at the playground came to see a 7-year-old crying and a teenager laughing maniacally. I got yelled at, but it was totally worth it. It didn't even look that funny, but for some reason I found it hilarious. Story 57. There is a meme that I find hysterical for some reason. If my significant other just mentioned part of the text, I would end up crying with laughter. I love it so much that last Valentine's Day he printed and framed it for me. I have had the meme in my room for almost a year and it still makes me laugh every day. I will never understand why it affects me so strongly. Edit. I included an image of the meme and proof that it is framed. Story 58. We had a chapel service at school in which our vice principal was interviewed about the importance of prayer. I told my friends to imagine her saying, "masturbate," every time she said, "pray." She said that the moment she wakes up she prays, then she prays with her husband. They often walk out into the garden and pray. She actually has a book full of students' names and pictures and often prays for each of us individually. I couldn't breathe from silent laughter during the entire service. Story 59. I once saw Wreck-It Ralph 2 with my family while we were on vacation. We were all sleeping in the same room, it was very late, and none of us were fully awake. The movie was pretty bad, but we all enjoyed it ironically. eBay is a major plot point in the film. At the end, just before I fell asleep, someone said, "eBay, buy and use." The E stands for electronic. I still laugh whenever I think about that. Story 60. One night shift. We found ourselves down a rabbit hole of Amazon reviews. Many were about fake fruit, but one fake lemon had the worst reviews for being too small. We laughed until we cried. Story 61. In 8th grade science class, I told a joke to a friend and was sent out into the hall for laughing too much. I didn't even finish the joke, and it wasn't that funny. Story 62. This happened a few weeks ago. During lunch at school, my friend and I were sitting at a table under a tree. A bird pooped on my arm, and we laughed about it. I took my hoodie off and said it was fine since there was only one class period left. A few minutes later, while I was still eating, another bird pooped next to me on my other side and it splashed onto my other arm. I started swearing and scooted to the side away from the droppings, but I ended up scooting too far and fell off the bench. I lay on the ground laughing for a few minutes while he laughed down at me from the bench. Story 63. When I was young, I watched an episode of Hell's Kitchen in which a contestant fell while running with a large bag of ice. I laughed hysterically until I cried. I don't know why. My mom still brings it up years later. She thought I was on drugs. Story 64. I was 19 and had just started experimenting with cannabis. I was eating McDonald's French fries when I got a soggy one. I picked it up and, as I looked at it before putting it in my mouth, it dejectedly drooped over in slow motion. The room had been nearly silent until I started giggling uncontrollably and waving the French fry around. It took me several minutes to explain why I was laughing. Story 65. I am studying chemistry, and this happened in an undergraduate laboratory. I was under a lot of stress, which probably did not help. I was doing a synthesis that took 3 days, and at the end of the reaction I looked into the flask where there was supposed to be a lot of white crystals, about 15 to 20 grams, and all I saw was a tiny bit of material at the bottom of the liquid, maybe the size of a grain of salt. I looked at it for a few seconds and then lost it. I laughed uncontrollably for several minutes. Some people were legitimately worried about my mental state, and I was too. Story 66. I was reading a series of dad jokes back to my husband, and each punchline I found funnier. Finally, I reached one joke that pushed me over the edge. Where does the general put his armies? In his sleeveys. I fucking lost it. I was wheezing and could not breathe. I would regain my composure, remember the joke, and laugh again. Story 67. I was shredding cheese for enchiladas onto a paper plate and being a little rough with the grater when my roommate came out and asked what I was doing. I said I was cooking. He came over, looked at the plate, and I said cheese plate. We both paused for about 15 seconds and then burst out laughing. For the rest of the night, we sat quietly but kept giggling about the cheese plate. Story 68. Back in elementary school, One day I started laughing at my friend's voice impression. There was something about it that I just could not stop laughing for 3 or 4 classes. I have never laughed so much since. Story 69. We had a margarita. My friend told us about a roommate who would ask to be sung to sleep. I deadpanned the Michael Scott joke. Would she fit in a regular-sized canoe? She said no. We all died laughing. Story 70. My friend cremated her goldfish when we were in high school, about 20 years ago. She brought it out in a small box, and I laughed so hard I fell to the ground. She was horrified and began crying, and told me it had taken her 15 hours to reduce his body to ashes in her oven. I thought it was absurd to cremate a fish that lives in water and to spend an entire day doing it. I stopped laughing and comforted her. She has never forgotten my reaction, and it still makes me laugh to this day. Story 71. When my son was born, he spent 5 days in the neonatal intensive care unit because the staff could not determine what was wrong with him. He is okay now. They gave him a tiny pacifier with a clear hole in the middle, so when he sucked on it his mouth formed an exaggerated surprised shape. I burst out, laughing and cried with laughter. The other neonatal intensive care unit parents and staff reacted with concern and anger. I could not stop for about 5 minutes, and then every time I looked at him for the next hour I laughed again. I had not slept for 3 days at that point, so I may have been delirious. Story 72. I recently reread cuberule.com, and it made me laugh hysterically for several minutes. Story 73. My mom had dragged me to Winn-Dixie on a Saturday night when I was about 13. I was bored out of my mind, and when I thought we were nearly done, my mom found a friend she hadn't seen in a while and they started talking. It was around Halloween, so the store had all the goofy decorations up. I wandered away from them and looked at the case I was closest to, and I absolutely lost my mind. The sign chosen to decorate that case of discount meat was a black cat with its back arched, positioned at an angle. The case held little brown sausage links called Lil Sizzlers. I was laughing, wheezing, and snorting so hard I couldn't catch my breath to explain to my mom and her very worried friend why I had apparently lost my mind for no reason. Story 74. Not me, but I caused it. I don't think I had ever made my dad laugh in my life, but we were sitting at a casino buffet when I got up to get another plate. I walked to the Chinese section and filled a plate with sweet and sour meatballs. A joke popped into my head. I sat back down across from my dad, put on a thick New York accent, and said, "The sign on the food said, sweet and sour meatballs." So I asked the guy, which ones are the sweet ones and which ones are the sour ones? It was a pretty tame joke, but something triggered my dad and he absolutely lost it. He laughed so hard for 20 minutes that he could not eat or even talk to anyone without bursting into uncontrollable laughter again. It has been 20 years, and I have not seen him laugh that hard since, except when I bring it up. Story 75. There is a particular meme that always gets me. The top half reads, "If the words you say appeared on your skin, would you still be beautiful?" And shows a pretty girl's hand with words like love and joy on it. The bottom half shows a woman's hand with the words, "Geez Louise, I'm bonkers for cheese." Story 76. The first time I saw National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation was the scene when Clark Griswold's Christmas lights failed and he pummeled Santa and the reindeer. I laughed so hard I thought I would suffocate. What an amazing performance. Story 77. I was watching an episode of Monty Python. At the end of the sketch, the outline of the muscles on a body chart in the background popped out, turned into Python vision, and started walking to the right. It continued past flowers, birds, and other cartoon scenes before falling off the end of the film. It was so unexpected that I laughed for at least 5 minutes. Story 78. My partner and I had our parents over for dinner and took a photo of everyone at the table. Later that night, after everyone went home, I looked at the picture and directly behind my partner's father was a framed photo of my brother-in-law. From that perspective, it looked like a tiny Greg was peeking out and waving from behind his shoulder, and we nearly died laughing. Story 79. I watched a video one night on Instagram and found it insanely funny. Something about the sheer stubbornness of the man in the Jeep trying to get it unstuck made me laugh, and the squeaking was what really got me. I do not think I have ever laughed so hard in my life. Then it got strange. One second I was laughing hysterically and the next I was crying, and I did not notice the change. I cried for about 3 seconds, then stopped and thought, what was that about? It was one of the strangest things to happen to me because I have not cried in years. It was almost as if I was so far on one end of an emotional spectrum that my brain jumped to the other end. Strange. Story 80. When my sister and I were kids, our mother had to work a late shift and we were home alone. We decided to live it up and make chocolate chip cookies. We felt so rebellious. We had the cookies with milk. After I finished my small pile of cookies, I still had a little milk left, so I grabbed another cookie to keep the proper milk-to-cookie ratio. One bite of cookie, one sip of milk. Before I finished the cookie, the milk was gone, so I refilled my glass. The cycle continued until I ran out of milk and cookies at the same time. This could be a cute story about my 11-year-old self making excuses to eat more cookies, but what made it memorable was that my sister and I found it so funny we started laughing uncontrollably and could not stop for over an hour. It was infectious. When I would calm down a little, my sister would laugh harder and vice versa. By the end, we were both a bit sore from laughing so much. Story 81. My friend and I were doing practice calculus 2 problems in the physics library. We reached the point where we could solve some integrals in our heads, and the absurdity of one of them made me laugh for 10 minutes as the sun rose. I thought I had been broken by the course. It is one of my favorite memories of college. Story 82. Yes, I've been dying to tell this story, and I'm cracking up as I'm typing it. It was on Reddit. A guy was complaining on the Baltimore Ravens subreddit. Another user responded with, "Shut the fuck up, you little bitch." I don't know why, but the inflection I hear is a sort of hushed, very deadpan line reading, and it cracks me up every time I think about it. I'm laughing right now. Story 83. I used to take acid several times a year. One weekend, I was tripping on a heavy dose on a beautiful day with a good friend. I was in maximum comfort mode in the sun, wearing loose, cool clothes, sunglasses, and casually smoking a cigarette, slumped completely in a cushioned lawn chair. I am small, so this chair really enveloped me. It was not a cheap plastic chair. It was part of my parents' wrought iron set with super thick, soft cushions, made for excellent lounging. Under normal circumstances, I could have looked like the queen of chill, readying myself for a big nap. However, I was tripping hard. I looked at my friend and said, "Honestly, man, I am on the edge of my fucking seat right now." And both of us lost our shit for what felt like an hour. The contrast of appearing completely relaxed and consumed by fluffy cushions while saying I felt shot into space was hysterical to us. Story 84. Do you remember that scene from SpongeBob where a child is crying and says he did not want a pistachio, and the father shouts, "Then why did you ask for it?" One of my friends said that out of nowhere, and I laughed for 15 minutes. Story 85. I laughed out loud at my friend's new haircut until I was screeching. Story 86. This happened earlier today. My brother gave me a half-scale Formula 1 helmet replica of my favorite driver. I found that the helmet fit a plush Snoopy I have had since childhood. The helmet size on Snoopy's tiny body makes me laugh. Story 87. My friend from Sweden was telling me about her uncle, who drove to Amsterdam and accidentally bought a horse. I misheard because of her Swedish accent. I heard whore. She went on about how her uncle had to sneak this whore home and hide it from his wife, then eventually had to fess up and build a barn to keep the whore in. She said he figured, since he already had one, why not 12, and he developed a whore training school. I got increasingly confused until the barn part, when I had to stop her for clarification, and then we all fell apart. Story 88. There are a couple of little people in my neighborhood. They are very sweet. They have bushes in their front yard about 7 feet tall and decorated them with Christmas lights. The lights only go halfway up. I drove by one day and absolutely lost it. I know it's kind of mean, but I couldn't help laughing. Story 89. When I was an undergraduate, a friend and I walked into class early and our professor, who was a young man, was the only other person there. We started commenting on how cold the room was, and I cannot recall the exact story, but he told us about a time he was in a cold room and had forgotten to wear an undershirt. He said his nipples became so pointy that he demonstrated with his hands. What made the story so funny was not the story itself, but the way he told it in a deadpan, expressionless manner. I laughed so hard that I started crying and tumbled from my seat onto the floor while my professor and my friend continued their conversation. Eventually, they both looked at me in confusion, and my friend asked, "Oh my God, are you okay?" I still laugh about it to this day. Story 90. My friend and I smoked a lot of weed and went grocery shopping. We tried to go shopping for necessities, but halfway through I looked down and our choices were obviously due to the munchies. Frosted animal cookies, ice cream bars, brownies, our entire basket was full of this stuff. I looked up at him and said, "Look at our cart. Everyone knows we're high." That made us stop and start laughing in the middle of the aisle. I doubled over until I was almost on the floor. Tears were in my eyes. My abs hurt so much by the end of it. I may have tinkled a little. The funny thing is, no one would have thought we were high just from our basket, but us laughing like crazy people definitely gave us away. Story 91. Today someone told me they wished I were dead because I had just made them look dumb in a Pokemon battle before they rage quit. It made me laugh too hard for some reason. Story 92. I sometimes laugh in my sleep. A few times I have woken myself up laughing. I laugh so hard that I think it will never stop and that I am insane. I do not even know what was so funny. Story 93. When I was 8, my parents were going through a divorce. To be good parents, they signed me up for a weekly group session with a guidance counselor where we would talk about our feelings, that it was not our fault, and that our parents still loved us, along with 3 or 4 other kids going through the same thing. Honestly, while the divorce itself obviously sucked, I was coping fine. What bothered me more were the sessions. First, they were full of unhelpful cliches. Second, I had to leave class to attend them, so I was falling behind. Third, everyone in my class knew my parents were getting divorced, which brought a lot of unwelcome sympathy. I was not the only one who felt that way. One of the other kids in the group got downright surly. I mostly kept quiet and nodded through the crap, but this kid was frustrated that he had to be there. The counselor, who I remember as Stuart Smalley, gave him a trite speech about how he was lashing out in frustration over his family and did not really mean to be rude. The kid raised his index finger as if to make a point and responded with one word, "Bull." Just that, just bull. Not even a stronger word. I was 8, and I had never heard a kid talk back to an adult like that outside of maybe Bart Simpson, and it slayed me. He had summed up my feelings about several weeks of those sessions in a single concise syllable. I think I laughed so hard I had to wait out in the hall for the rest of the session. Story 94. A captioned picture of Helen Keller with her cat named Mittens, but it was actually a dog. I had no idea why I laughed uncontrollably. It was an okay joke, but I cried with laughter and could not stop. I was genuinely afraid I would not stop. Story 95. My wife and I were in the shower one night. My back was to the shower head, and I farted so loudly and for so long that, with the water hitting my lower back, it sounded like a drowning Daffy Duck. The more I thought about it, the harder and longer I laughed. Story 96. My mother was given her last rites and flown by helicopter to a regional medical center. My father and I were driving to the hospital. I was driving and holding on to my father's belt as he leaned out the window, screaming curse words at every car in front of us. We stopped at a traffic light as the helicopter flew directly overhead, on its way to the hospital. At that moment, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw my former fiancée in the car behind me with her new boyfriend. I began laughing so hard I lost my breath. I realized God had a sense of humor. My mother survived. My father did not kill anyone. I have not seen my ex for 20 years, so everything worked out. Story 97. My boyfriend sneezed and farted at the same time. I started giggling, and then he let out a quiet, almost offended-sounding ow. I completely lost it and fell onto my side, tears of laughter streaming down my face. Then he said, "It's not funny," which only made it funnier. I am trying not to laugh just writing about it. Story 98. A couple of years ago at New Year's with my family, I had been drinking champagne. My family was playing apples to apples and my cousin and I were on the same team. We started secretly taking more cards until each of us had almost 2 full decks. The atmosphere and being a bit tipsy made it so absurdly funny that no one noticed the number of cards we had for the entire game. I had to leave and come back because I was laughing so hard I felt sick and thought I might actually die. Story 99. I saw this for the first time a few years ago in the waiting room of my mother's doctor's office, not long after my father died. It still makes me chuckle. The first time I saw it, I laughed until I cried and hyperventilated, the way you do when something is truly funny but you are not supposed to laugh, so you try to be quiet and it only becomes funnier. It is also absurd. Laughing until your nose runs in a very quiet waiting room full of older people. Story 100. My uncle is a retired massage therapist. He only gives massages to friends and family now. One time, before the massage, I had a couple of very mild tetrahydrocannabinol mints. It was one of the few times I had ever been stoned, and I am a lightweight, so it was more than enough to get me high. I got on the massage table. My uncle had his Alexa play meditation music, and the massage was underway. He did my back first, and about halfway through I started to get the giggles. There was nothing funny, and I was still sober enough to realize that, but I wanted to laugh just because. I held it in because I knew laughing would interrupt the massage. I turned over, and the mints had really kicked in. I was having total stone thoughts, like, have you ever thought about how there is a skull in your head? My uncle told Alexa to skip the song, and then I had a new stone thought which I voiced. I said, hey, have you ever asked Alexa to play something but given it a random word, like, play cucumber, to see what comes up? He hesitated, then decided to indulge me. He said, Alexa, cucumber. Alexa started giving us the definition of a cucumber. I said, no, ask it to play cucumber. He said, Alexa, play cucumber. Alexa replied, playing Dance of the Cucumber by VeggieTales on Amazon Music. And we were treated to the dulcet squeaky tones of Larry the Cucumber. This would have been funny normally, but I had been fighting the urge to giggle for half an hour. Now that I had a real reason to laugh, the floodgates opened. I was on my back on the massage table, absolutely cackling. My uncle was yelling at Alexa to shut up because he did not appreciate Larry the Cucumber as massage music. His two dogs had left the room for the yard because if we were making noise, something must be going on and it had to be barked at. My uncle went to quiet the dogs, came back inside, and I was still laughing. By that point, I was laughing at the fact that I was laughing. He said, yup, you're stoned, and sat on the couch to wait for me to stop. Eventually, I had to make myself stop, because lying flat on my back was not an ideal position for laughing. It was really hard to stop, and even once the massage resumed, an errant giggle occasionally slipped out. Honestly, I am reluctant to get stoned again because it is hard to imagine what could top Larry the Cucumber during a massage. The next time I got stoned, it was with a different edible that was far too strong and I almost felt sick. I do not want to repeat that. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.